Hello, all. In this session, we will learn about a very popular poem of Robert Frost, Home Burial. Home Burial, first published in the year 1914, is one of Robert Frost's longest poems written in blank verse. So it's mostly in the form of a dialogue, and the poem centers around the peril and miscommunication, pain, death, grief in a very dramatic way. Frost has depicted a critical situation arising between husband and wife over the death of their son. There is the drama of social adjustment in human relationship. The poem presents moments of charged dialogue in a strained relationship. The husband and wife cope with grief very differently and can't understand or respect each other's mourning process. By the poem's conclusion, the title has taken a double meaning, referring not only to the grave of the couple's dead son, but to the likely death of their love and their marriage. In this poem, wife's anger and silence or reticence act like a moral rebuke to her husband. The woman is upset after catching sight of the child's grave through the window. She tries to leave the house, but the husband persists upon her to stay for once and give him a chance and share her grief with him. He doesn't understand what it is he does that offends her or why she should grieve outwardly so long. She resents him deeply for his composure, what she sees as his callous attitude or heartlessness. She vents some of her anger and frustration, and the distance between the couple keeps increasing. So, Home Burial focuses on Emmy's need to escape the confines of the house and marriage. When the narrative begins, we find Emmy in a position of metaphoric superiority. She is standing at the top of the staircase and peeps through the window and sees that her husband is digging the grave of the child. She is silent and ignores her husband's gaze from the bottom of the stairs. Her silence becomes a barrier. She believes that her husband is not touched by the tragedy at all. Though the husband tries to explain his position to her, she is unable to follow him. This creates a tension between them. The wife becomes almost hysterical and doesn't give any chance to her husband so that he can explain himself to her. So, as said, the husband requests her to stay and talk to him about her grief. He says that together we will, I'll share the grief, let's mourn. He does not understand why she is irritated with him for expressing his grief in a different way. He accepts her anger and requests her to let him be tutored, but the gap between them remains. So it's a highly suggestive poem. The poem is about two tragedies. First, the death of the young child, or the burial of a son, and the second, the death or end of a marriage or the burial of a relationship. Though the death of the child is considered as the prime cause of the couple's conflict, the larger conflict that devastated the marriage is the couple's incapability to communicate with one another. They both do not try to come out of their zone of grief and don't become the supporter of each other at all. Both are grief stricken at the loss of the child, but none of them is able to realize the way that their partner chooses to express their distress. So, Home Burial is perhaps the most intense of Frost's dramatic dialogues with gesture, movement, tone of voice, and sentencing the instruments of the tragedy. Grief at the loss of a first child spins the plot, and neither the wife nor the husband is at fault. But the conflict between the husband, a countryman, and the wife, a city bred, is nonetheless pitiful and terrible. To the man, it seems only right that he should have dug his child's grave himself in his family graveyard, visible from their bedroom window. He is insensitive enough to repeat a country saying about rotting birch fences to his wife without realizing how the dismay or decay has amplified her grief. Yet, his own grief is as real as it is controlled. He has begun to accept the death of his boy, but his wife is yet to. And it speaks another kind of truth in altering the same. The issue between the couple, is mostly unresolved. The wife gives out the threat. You think the talk is all? I must go somewhere out of this house. How can I make you? But time presumably will resolve their differences. In home burial, the strange and the familiar are strikingly blended. The situation is strange, common in words, but uncommon in the experience. Now, when we look at the major themes, the cost of miscommunication comes out quite glaring. Language and communication are central to home burial. This poem focuses on the couple's failure to understand each other in the wake of their child's death and their subsequent expression through action and words. So, this breakdown in communication, more than their grief, threatens to destroy their marriage, as neither of them is able to appreciate or empathize. The couple's inability to listen to each other ultimately leads to an unresolved crisis. Despite the poem's extensive use of dialogue, the husband and the wife never seem to truly hear each other out over the course of the poem. The poem starts out with the husband apparently trying to understand his wife better. I quote, "There is something I should like to ask you, dear." End quote. But the fact that he ignores his wife's repeated request to drop the subject indicates he is not really listening. Subsequently, his wife rejects her husband's plea to find a way to talk about their grief, characterizing what he has to say as sneering and accusing him of not knowing how to speak. She also implies that she does not believe any words or language can begin to capture the depth of her grief. Withdrawn and conditioned mindset that makes any attempt at communication impossible. Both are more eager to air their own grievances. This communication breakdown only heightens the conflict between the two. For example, even as he requests that she give him his chance, the husband accuses his wife of overdoing it a little. Unsurprisingly, these accusations only fan the flames of the couple's argument, making communication between the two of them even more harder and leading to anger and misunderstanding that seems impossible for them to cope. They hint throughout the poem that the wife is taking her grievance elsewhere. I quote the lines, "Don't go to someone else this time. Listen to me," the husband pleads. Only emphasize that this is an argument the couple has had over and over. Thus, Home burial emphasizes the importance of communication for the survival and success of couples in a relationship. Another very prominent theme is death and grief. So, home burial, as the title suggests, is a poem concerned with death. The poem does not favor one grieving process or the other, but it does capture how the couple's inability to recognize, respect, empathize with their partner's individual response to the tragic loss of their child leads to pain and conflict. Throughout the poem, the wife's approach to grief is depicted as deeply emotional. The husband takes a much more active approach to grief, though he does initially try to understand his wife's mourning process. He later on says that this is something which you are overdoing, and he also tells her like loss of one child doesn't mean end of a relationship or marriage. Finally, the poem ends with deadlock, with the wife attempting to leave the house and her husband threatening to bring her back by force. The poem offers no hope of resolving the pain and conflict between the two of them, lending the final ominous undertone that suggests their marriage is as dead as the child buried in their home graveyard. So, in this, we can notice the gender plays a very prominent role. Gender affects every aspect of the relationship between the two characters in this poem. Written in the early 20th century, the poem invokes traditional stereotypical gender role, focusing on a dominant stoic husband and an emotional wife. The poem demonstrates some of the dangers of rigid gender stereotypes. Gender shapes how the husband and wife approach the poem's central conflict. The husband relies on dominance and physical force, whereas the wife is emotional. Thus, Frost brings larger issues into the forefront, like husband wife relationship, the difference between a man and a woman, life and death. The title of the poem is highly significant when we look at the themes dealt in the poem, as it suggests not only the burial of the dead infant but also the end of the relationship. So, written in blank verse, home burial gives expression to different shades of feeling and thought and is highly exquisite, masterly use of monosyllables